My name is Matt. Glad you could join us on this Shabbat or whatever day you are watching this message. We're glad you're hanging with us through the scroll of Exodus. We're spending a year going through the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It's foundational to understanding the God of Israel and his heart to bring all of creation back to himself. Nahum Sarnas said, biblical religion revolves around 2 themes, creation and the Exodus. Now, the influence and the understanding of the creation accounts of Genesis and the Exodus narrative of slavery to freedom are foundational to how you understand everything else in the Bible through to the end of the New Testament. The rest of the Bible hyperlinks to either creation or the Exodus, and often both. Even Yeshua's death, resurrection, and ascension into heaven hyperlink back to the Passover, because they happen on Passover. The entire calendar, what you would call the Lord's calendar, or what we call the Jewish calendar, is organized around the Exodus. In this week's Torah portion, chapter 12 and verse 1 of Exodus says, "Now Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, 'This month will mark the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year for you.'" So Passover is the start of the year, every year, liturgically and agriculturally. It's the beginning of every year. It's a new creation. And Exodus, the Exodus, is a new creation. It's a start of the people of God. He saved us, delivered us, redeemed us, made us his people, and became our God. You know, 4 cups, 4 promises last week. The Lord made promises to the patriarchs and the matriarchs, and Exodus is the proof that the promises of Genesis were real. So the text shifts from telling the story of the Exodus to, "and this is how you will remember this moment forever." Exodus 12, verse 14. "This day is to be a memorial for you. You're to keep it as a feast to Adonai. Throughout your generations, you're to keep it as an eternal ordinance." Now, typically, we set up memorials to remind us of something that happened in the past. Statues of great people who did great things, war memorials of those who died in battle. We even create days on calendars to remember great events, like the 4th of July or D-Day. In this generation, 9/11 is a day stamped on our collective brains, and there are events every September 11th to remember what happened on that day. Another way that people remember important historical events is in reenactments. I remember going to Fort Lee in New Jersey as a kid. It's a park right off the George Washington Bridge, and it's the setting for the Battle of Fort Lee during the American Revolution. November 19th, 1776, marked the successful invasion of New Jersey by the British and this retreat of the Continental Army led by George Washington. So the Battle of Fort Lee is referred to as the retreat to victory, because Washington withdrew all the troops from Fort Lee, and it allowed them to recoup. When the British got there, no one was there. The fires were still hot, but no one was there. And it enabled them to eventually launch successful surprise attacks on Trenton and Princeton, turning the tide of the war in their favor. Effectively, it transformed a disastrous retreat, what seemed, into a pivotal moment towards ultimate victory. So on the nearest weekend in November, a group holds reenactments of the retreat to victory. This year, 2025, will be the 249th commemoration of this important retreat of Washington's army. Now, as a kid, I remember going to this reenactment and hearing the music from the 1700s and men and women dressed as they were in the 1700s. They showed us how they ate and slept and lived. They showed us how the weapons worked then and how these armies actually fought each other. They're things you can't understand by reading in a book. They're things that you have to see to understand. This is why we say in our Passover meals at Restoration every year, we say this: tradition teaches us that in each generation, we must consider ourselves as having personally been free from Egypt. We allow our senses to fully participate, taking in the sights, tasting each ingredient, listening to every word, so that we can see, hear, and feel the truth of God's love in the Passover. We're commanded in Exodus to treat the celebration of Passover both individually and corporately as if you were there. That's the title of this third part of the scroll of Exodus. See, Passover is a memorial to the past event of the Exodus, and it's a reenactment as if we were there. The literary design of the narrative makes it clear that we're not meant to just be readers of the story. We are not outside observers. God commands the Jewish people to be participants in the Exodus, that every time we read the story and when we celebrate Passover, we attempt to put ourselves in the story. The Exodus is not just an event that happened thousands of years ago. It's a current event. So we memorialize it and we reenact the event every year. So God's goal in all of this is that, in the Exodus, is that Israel and Egypt, that the whole world through Egypt will know that only He is God and that only He can make creation, only He can make creation bend to His will. It's why the Exodus is a hyperlink back to the creation accounts of Genesis. The literary design and the repetition of themes suggest that the 10 plagues are presented as a form of uncreation or decreation. It's chaos instead of order. There's loss of dominion of human beings over creatures. And creation is no longer tov. It's no longer good. And it's having a negative effect on human beings and the world. This is part of the goal of the 10 plagues in the Exodus. Nahum Sarna says the 10 plagues are to demonstrate to Egypt the impotence of its gods, and by contrast, the incomparability of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God of Israel, as the one supreme sovereign God of creation, who uses the phenomena of natural order for His own purposes. In the last plague, the 10th plague, the killing of the firstborn of Egypt, the Lord said, "For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and strike down every firstborn, both men and animals, and I will execute judgments against all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. I am He is that He is." So there's actually 9 plagues in 3 groups, plus one more, the 10th. And they all have natural, the first 9 have all natural occurrences that the God of Israel used for His purposes. They can be explained as things that do and still could happen in Egypt. Like some have said that each plague is a direct attack on specific gods of Egypt. And there really isn't a way to show that in the text itself. But in the religion of ancient Egypt, Pharaoh's job was to make sure everything was good, that everything was harmonious in the world and in creation. John Salhammer says it this way. He says, within Egyptian religion, the universe was to exist in a harmonious whole, with each part contributing to a well-balanced system. So the Egyptian word for this was ma'at. It was the responsibility of the Pharaoh as the incarnate God on earth to maintain this balance. So the plagues, the 10 plagues, are a clear affront to Pharaoh because Pharaoh has failed as a god to keep order in the world. The plagues throw Egypt into chaos and in order to subvert the idea that Pharaoh is a god at all. So the Lord said in Exodus 7 and verse 3, He said, "I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt." Now, the hardening of Pharaoh's heart is quite a confusing and many varied opinions of what this really means. But the hardening of Pharaoh's heart is mentioned 20 times between Exodus 4 and Exodus 14. And the first of the 10 times, Pharaoh hardens his own heart. The first 10 times, Pharaoh hardens his own heart. The second 10 times, God is the one who hardens Pharaoh's heart. But it's not just the word harden that is actually in Hebrew. There are 3 different words that are used in these 20 times that it's used. Sometimes the word is hard, sometimes the word is strong, and sometimes the word is heavy. So most often, and this is so interesting, but most often Pharaoh makes his heart strong rather than hard. He makes his heart resolute or determined. He knows how he should respond, and he determines to do what he wants to do anyway. He makes his heart strong. And in Egypt, there are two ideas about the heart. A hard heart and a heavy heart. And they're different than each other. A hard heart is a determined heart. And in Egypt, it was a positive attribute for people and for pharaohs. You want your pharaoh to be somebody who speaks on behalf of the gods, to speak with confidence and determination. But the Lord takes this hard heart and he inverts this positive Egyptian concept, and he shows that Pharaoh is just determined to do what he wants to do against what the Lord wants him to do. So it's a showdown. Now, a heavy heart is the word kaved, and it's also a known Egyptian idea. It's one of, really, this is one of the coolest things I've learned so far in the book of Exodus. Thanks again to the fantastic resources at the Bible Project. There's a class on Exodus. You should totally watch it. It's amazing. And this idea of a heavy heart is found in the Book of the Dead. A heavy heart in Egypt meant you were guilty of injustice. It's reflected in the same idea of ma'at. The ancient Egyptians had this deep conviction of an underlying holiness or unity within the universe. And cosmic harmony was achieved by Pharaoh's behavior. And any disturbance in cosmic harmony could have consequences for Pharaoh as well as for Egypt. A king with a heavy heart could cause isfet, which was chaos and violence for Egypt. So if we zoom in on the picture, you see a scale, and in the afterlife, the Egyptian gods would weigh a person's heart, it's in the jar on the side there, and if against a feather on a balance. And a heart heavier than a feather is guilty of injustice. It's called a heavy heart. The author of Exodus uses this Egyptian ideal of a heavy heart or a guilty heart. The idea that Pharaoh, who does injustice, can bring chaos and violence on the people of Egypt, and makes it the reason for the 10 plagues. The Lord finds Pharaoh guilty by Egyptian standards. It's so awesome. So you go back to these three words for hard heart. Hard, strong, heavy. And Pharaoh never makes his own heart strong. He only makes his heart heavy. And the Lord almost always makes Pharaoh's heart strong or resolute. So the idea is Pharaoh will be more of what he already is. He makes his own heart heavy against this God that he refuses to know. And then God strengthens Pharaoh's position to make himself known to Israel, to Egypt, and the whole world. So the heavy heart goes with inaction, while a strong heart goes with a refusal to shema, to listen and obey. If you look in the Lord's glory, which is the same root word as heavy, it's kavod, glory, kaved, heavy, that it is the glory of the Lord that outweighs Pharaoh's heavy heart. And it is the Lord's strong arm, that the same word, strong arm, that overcomes Pharaoh's chazak heart, his strong heart. So from this point on in the Bible, the scriptures will use phrases like strong hand and with a strong hand and an outstretched arm in reference to God rescuing Israel in Egypt, in the Exodus from Egypt. Like in the last verse of this week's Torah portion, the Torah portion bow, Exodus 13, verse 16. So it'll be a sign on your hand and like frontlets between your eyes, for by a strong hand Adonai brought us out of Egypt. Or in the Psalms, in Psalm 136, they celebrate what God did in Egypt. And the psalmist says, who struck Egypt in their firstborn, for his loving kindness endures forever. And led out Israel from among them, for his loving kindness endures forever. With a strong hand and an outstretched arm, for his loving kindness endures forever. This phrase, strong hand and outstretched arm, is borrowed from the pharaohs of Egypt. There's a standard pose for pharaohs of Egypt, and it is with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. A great example is called the Narmer palette. It's an Egyptian makeup tray that's 2 feet tall. That's a lot of makeup. And on the back of the tray is Pharaoh Narmer, who is smiting the head of a foe. Now, this mace pose was standard for pharaohs for 3,000 years in Egypt. He has a strong hand with a staff raised to hit the one he's judging, and an outstretched arm grabbing the hair of the one being judged. So the pharaohs would pose this way to show their strong heart and the authority to lead on behalf of the gods of Egypt. So Exodus, the author of Exodus, uses the same language for how the God of Israel treats Pharaoh, who has a heavy heart and who is guilty of injustice. By saying God has a strong hand and an outstretched arm, it's a mockery of Pharaoh as a god and a celebration of the strong hand and the outstretched arm of God against the stubborn Pharaoh. It's so awesome. I mean, if you're a Bible nerd, I guess it's awesome. If you're not into this stuff, I don't know why you're watching. So, Nahum says, by reinforcing Pharaoh's stubbornness, thereby making him a prisoner of his own irrationality. God deprives the God, lowercase g, of his freedom of action. The Pharaoh can no longer control his own will, and his so-called divinity is mocked. Or Carmen Imes, who teaches the Bible Project class overview of Exodus, she said God knew Pharaoh would resist, but still gave Pharaoh many chances. Pharaoh's evil reaches a point of no return. God bends Pharaoh's evil to his own purposes and lures him into his own destruction. And here's the good news. You're not Pharaoh. We're all at different times in our lives. We've all made or make our hearts hard, strong, and heavy. But you're here, and you're watching, and you're listening, and you're not so far gone that God cannot soften your heart in order to give you the 4 cups of promises, the 4 cups of wine in the Passover. He can soften your hard heart in order to save you, deliver you, redeem you, and make you his own. So we're commanded then to both memorialize and reenact the Exodus as if you were there. So our God is the God of the past, present, and the future. He knows all things, and he operates with both justice and mercy, perfectly balanced. Look, there's a tension in 2 opposite ideas being true at the same time. And as human beings, we don't like tension. Just tell me when things are only tov and only ra, only good, only bad. We want things to be clear, right? We want good to be good and we want bad to be bad. But the problem is nothing in life is that clear. We all have to face what I've been calling the last few weeks, the tov, the ra, and the ugly. We have all sinned and fall short of the image of God that we were made in. We all have sin, past, present, and future. We all have tov moments, good moments, and ra moments, bad moments. We have all done good things and we've all done bad things. We have all loved deeply and wounded those we love deeply. And we have all been abandoned and wounded and suffer all kinds of heartbreak. So we ask questions like, why do these things happen? Or why do bad things happen to good people? And if you allow me, I'll rephrase the question, because I think what you're really asking is, are the things that happen in my life related to how good or bad I am? And the answer is no. And also yes. This is what Paul is trying to flesh out in Romans, where he quotes Exodus. And in Romans 9, verse 17, he says, "For the scriptures say to Pharaoh, for this purpose I raised you up, to demonstrate my power in you, so that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. So then he has mercy on whom he wills, and he hardens whom he wills." Unfortunately, different theological persuasions have overtaken Paul's greater point in this section of Romans and turned Paul's words into an argument over whether God predetermines people to be tov or ra, good or bad. But that's not what Paul's doing here. Paul knows, just as you and I know, that Pharaoh determined in his heart to rebel against the Lord, and that the Lord gave Pharaoh many chances to turn his heart to the Lord in repentance. At some point, God gave Pharaoh over to his own desire. And in Romans 9, Paul is grieving the reality that many Jewish people have rejected Yeshua and have turned their hearts away from God. And Paul's saying that Pharaoh was raised up for a purpose, to demonstrate God's power to the whole earth. That's in the Exodus. And you are not Pharaoh. At some point, God will let you keep going towards your own destruction. And I want you to know that today is not that day. God is both the judge, jury, and executioner, and God is full of mercy for those who turn their hearts towards him. He loves to take hard, strong, heavy hearts and soften them so that we can see just how much he loves us. So Paul continues in a very Jewish way by answering questions with more questions. Romans 9, verse 19, he says, you will say to me then, why does God still find fault? For who has resisted his will? But who in the world are you, O man who talks back to God? Will what is formed say to the one who formed it, why did you make me like this? Does the potter have no right over the clay to make from the same lump one vessel for honor and another for common use? Now, what if God, willing to demonstrate his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much patience vessels of wrath designed for destruction? And what if he did so to make known the riches of his glory on vessels of mercy, which he prepared beforehand for glory? We are at the very same time both vessels of wrath designed for destruction and vessels of mercy, which he prepared beforehand for glory. It's tension, baby. And both are true at the same time. The NIV Bible commentary says it this way: God can be glorified through both those who oppose him and through those who trust and serve him. So don't be like Pharaoh. That guy's not even named in the story because he didn't matter. We are commanded to both memorialize and to reenact the Exodus as if we were there. So as you do that, as we prepare in February for Passover in April, ask God to soften your heart, to find his mercy, to help you find his mercy through difficulty, to help you see hope where there is none, to help you find light in the darkness. You can ask the Holy Spirit to show you for the first time or remind you how many times he saved you from wrath and gave you mercy. The Lord did it all with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, all so that he could show you mercy and bring you to himself. Pharaoh believed he was God. He believed his actions could control harmony in the universe and creation. And what's funny is, in one sense, this Pharaoh was right. His actions did affect creation. But it was his strong and heavy heart that forced God to use his strong hand and outstretched arm for justice against the Egyptians. And Yeshua, our Messiah, is actually God. Our Messiah is the God of Israel in human form. He was there in the beginning, and all things were made by him and through him. And in 3 of the Gospels, there's this wild moment called the Transfiguration, where Yeshua goes up to the top of a mountain. You know, mountains, as we've talked about through Genesis and Exodus, are where heaven and earth meet. And his appearance changed, and the glory of God was revealed to Peter, Jacob, and John as they stood with him. And the Gospel of Luke tells it like this in Luke 9, verse 28. It says, Yeshua took Peter, John, and Jacob with him and went up to the mountain to pray. While he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothing flashed like white lightning. And behold, 2 men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah. And appearing in glory, they were speaking of Yeshua's departure, which was about to take place in Jerusalem. Now, this word departure in English, in the Greek, is actually the word exodus, because exodus means an exit. And it really should read like this. Appearing in glory, they were speaking of Yeshua's exodus, which was about to take place in Jerusalem. Greek has other words for departure. Luke seems to choose Exodus on purpose to describe what will take place in Jerusalem during Passover. 6 more times, starting in Luke 9, verse 51, Yeshua makes clear that he has to go to Jerusalem for Passover. It's amazing because Yeshua's not only memorializing Passover with his disciples by celebrating it and remembering the Exodus, but he is also reenacts the Exodus with his own Exodus on the same days of the Jewish calendar as the original Exodus. It's right before Passover that he's crucified. It's during Passover that he rises from the dead. He appears resurrected for 40 days of the 50 days of Omer. He ascends into heaven on the 40th day. All of those things are Yeshua's Exodus. His death, resurrection, appearing resurrected, and ascension are all his reenactment of the Exodus on Passover. In the first of months, Nisan, because of the Exodus. His Exodus cannot happen without the original Exodus. And it is a new Exodus that is also a reenactment of the original Exodus. And who is Yeshua talking with about his Exodus? Moses and Elijah. I think there seems to be 3 reasons why scholars say that it's Moses and Elijah. First, Moses is the one who God sent to deliver his people from slavery and bring them into the promised land in the Exodus. And Elijah was believed in the first century to be the prophet who would announce Messiah's arrival because of the prophet Malachi. Second, they could be the Torah and the prophets, Moses and Elijah. Third, Moses and Elijah are 2 people who saw the glory of God and experienced it on Mount Sinai. Many years apart, on the same mountaintop. And it's on a mountaintop in the promised land where Moses actually never went. That Moses is now standing in the promised land with Yeshua. And the 3 of them are having a conversation about Yeshua's Exodus that is coming soon in Jerusalem on Passover. And it did come. Yeshua made his own Exodus, a memorial and a reenactment of Passover. And if we celebrate, if we celebrate the Exodus as if we were there, then we should also celebrate Yeshua's Exodus as if we were there. What would it be like to stand there and watch Yeshua die a bloody and awful death? What would it be like if we could experience the fear and the pain of the disciples who lost their friend and rabbi and for 3 days thought everything had ended? And as they're still eating matzah during the week of Passover, they then see him alive. What would it be like to speak with Yeshua and eat with him after you watched him die? What would it have been like to see him ascend into heaven, like take off for the sky, after he pronounces the Aaronic benediction over his disciples? To see him and to hear him so all the nations would know that he is Lord in the Exodus. It's not something that happened 2,000 years ago. You can see him and speak with him and experience his glory right here on earth, right where you are. It's why we memorialize 2 Exoduses. Let's just call it Exodus squared. The Exodus from Egypt and Yeshua's Exodus during Passover. We memorialize and reenact the events when we partake in the elements of Passover as if we were there. Every time we drink the 4 cups of Passover, every time we say Kiddush over the wine and the bread on Erev Shabbat, every time you partake in the eating of his body, the bread, and the drinking of his blood, the wine, you memorialize and reenact Exodus twice, Exodus squared. So, let's talk about your Exodus. You're in pain. You need to be set free. You need the 4 cups of wine. You need to be saved, delivered, redeemed, and made a part of the people of God. There's all kinds of ra around you, all kinds of bad things around you, and it's hard to see a way out of the pain that you're experiencing. And you were there. You were there when God set Israel free from Egypt, and you were there when Yeshua died, rose, and ascended into heaven, and you are here, right now. And there is a transformation that God wants to do in your life today. And you are not Pharaoh. You have a soft heart and a willingness to do all the things that God planned for you in your life. And you're also Pharaoh with a bit less influence. But just like me, and just like all human beings, you have a hard, strong, and heavy heart often. But Yeshua, our Messiah, as God and man, can hold the tension of those things. Yeshua can transform you and change you. You just have to let him do what he wants to do in you. And he has given you everything you need to be transformed by the power of the Holy Spirit so you can experience the glory of God right now on earth. The glory of the Lord is upon you so that you can become a more fully devoted follower of Yeshua. I love you guys, and I hope you come back as we continue going through the Exodus together. And next week we get into the Sea of Reeds, not the Red Sea, and we see God continue to do miracles for the children of Israel as they leave Egypt.